In Michigan's copper country, where industrial ghosts haunt forgotten mines, some mysteries echo through decades of silence. On the night of September 12, 2023, Maria Hendrickson was awakened by a sound she hadn't heard in 40 years. The rhythmic pounding of heavy machinery echoed across the pine forests of Keweenaw County, Michigan, drifting through her bedroom window like a ghost from the industrial past. The source seemed to be coming from the direction of the old Keweenaw copper mine, sealed and abandoned since 1983. Hendrickson, a retired teacher who had lived in Copper Falls Township her entire life, recognized that sound immediately. Her late husband had worked the mines for 35 years before the closure, and she knew the distinctive rhythm of underground equipment. But the Keweenaw mine had been officially sealed, its entrances blocked with concrete barriers and warning signs posted by the Environmental Protection Agency. No machinery should have been operating there for decades. The following morning, Hendrickson called the Keweenaw County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Frank Corhonen, responding to what he initially assumed would be a routine noise complaint, noted her report but didn't investigate immediately. Similar calls had come in sporadically over the years, usually attributed to logging operations or highway construction echoing off the surrounding hills. But when Dr. Sarah Makinen received the referral 3 days later, she took it seriously. Makinen, an environmental scientist with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, had been tracking reports of possible illegal dumping in the region. The Keweenaw mine site remained on the EPA's Superfund watch list due to historic contamination, and any unauthorized activity required immediate investigation. On September 16th, Makinen drove the winding gravel roads that led to the mine's perimeter. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy of maple and birch trees, their leaves just beginning to show the first hints of autumn color. As her state-issued pickup truck navigated the rutted path, she could smell the distinctive metallic tang that still hung in the air around old copper workings, even after 4 decades of abandonment. What she discovered at the main gate would change everything. Fresh tire tracks pressed deep into the soft earth led directly to the concrete barriers. Someone had been here recently, and they had brought heavy equipment. The official seals on the mine entrance remained intact, but Makinen's trained eye caught something more troubling. The vegetation around the sealed entrance had been systematically disturbed. Broken branches and scraped bark on nearby trees suggested large machinery had maneuvered through the narrow access road within the past few weeks. Using her department-issued camera, Makinen documented the evidence methodically. The tire tracks were deep and wide, consistent with industrial vehicles far heavier than typical logging or maintenance equipment. Dark oil stains marked the ground in several spots, still fresh enough to reflect the afternoon light. Most troubling of all, she discovered a rectangular depression in the earth about 50 yards from the main entrance, as if something heavy had been set down, unloaded, or perhaps buried. That evening, Makinen filed her report with both the DNR and the EPA, flagging the site for immediate federal investigation. But before those agencies could respond, she made a discovery in the county records office that would transform what appeared to be a potential environmental violation into something far more complex and mysterious. While researching the mine's closure history, Makinen came across a file she hadn't expected to find. The disappearance of Robert Big Bob Järvinen, the mine's final foreman, remained an open case with the Keweenaw County Sheriff's Office. Järvinen had vanished on October 15, 1983, just weeks before the mine's official closure. Despite extensive search efforts, his body had never been recovered. The connection seemed too significant to dismiss as coincidence. Why would someone be secretly accessing a sealed mine that was also the site of an unsolved disappearance? As Makinen reviewed the case files late into the evening, one detail stood out with chilling clarity. Järvinen had been conducting a final safety inspection on the night he disappeared, checking the mine's structural integrity before the permanent closure. According to the original police report, he had been carrying detailed maps of the underground tunnel system. Maps that had never been found. By October 1st, 2023, both state and federal investigators had joined the inquiry into the unauthorized mine access. But their investigation would soon uncover questions that had been buried for 40 years. Questions about what really happened to Robert Järvinen, and why someone might still be searching for answers in the dark depths of the Keweenaw copper mine. Robert Järvinen stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 230 pounds, earning him the nickname Big Bob among the miners who worked under his supervision. At 52 years old in 1983, he had spent 25 years descending into the depths of the Keweenaw copper mine, rising from junior miner to shift foreman through a combination of technical expertise, unwavering reliability, and absolute loyalty to Keweenaw Mining Corporation. Järvinen embodied the values of Michigan's Upper Peninsula mining community. His Finnish grandfather had arrived in Copper Falls in 1903, drawn by the promise of steady work in what was then America's copper capital. 3 generations of Järvinen men had worked these mines, and Bob took deep pride in continuing the family tradition. He owned his house outright on Elm Street, a modest 2-story frame building that he had methodically renovated over the years. His wife Emma worked part-time at the township library, and their 2 children, Robert Jr. and Susan, were both attending Northern Michigan University on scholarships funded partly by the mining company. By 1983, however, the economic reality facing Keweenaw Mining Corporation had grown increasingly dire. Foreign competition and declining copper prices had forced mining companies across Michigan's Upper Peninsula to close operations throughout the late 1970s. Environmental regulations introduced after the Clean Water Act added substantial costs for waste management and land restoration. The writing was clearly on the wall for the Keweenaw mine, even though company officials continued to assure workers that operations would somehow continue. Järvinen understood the precarious situation better than most. As foreman, he had access to production reports and cost analyses that revealed the mine's declining profitability in stark detail. Yet he remained publicly supportive of the company line, even as younger miners talked openly about finding work in North Dakota's oil fields or Detroit's auto plants. His loyalty ran deeper than economics. It was rooted in family history and personal identity. Bob was a company man through and through, recalled Tommy Salonen, who worked under Järvinen for 15 years. Even when things got bad, when we weren't hitting quotas and the closure rumors started flying, Bob kept telling us to focus on the work. He believed if we kept producing good copper, the company would find a way to keep us going. The autumn of 1983 brought increasing tension to Copper Falls Township. Environmental groups had begun staging protests outside the mine gates, holding signs demanding accountability for decades of contaminated groundwater and disturbed forest land. The Keweenaw Bay Indian community, whose ancestral territory included the mining area, had filed formal complaints with federal agencies about the desecration of sacred sites. Local families found themselves bitterly divided between those who supported continued mining for economic survival and those who welcomed the opportunity for environmental restoration. Järvinen navigated these community pressures with characteristic stoicism. According to his wife Emma, he rarely discussed work stress at home, preferring to spend his evenings reading mining journals or maintaining his workshop in the basement. But in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, she noticed subtle changes in his behavior. He had begun staying late at the mine more frequently, citing the need to complete detailed safety inspections and equipment inventories for the closure process. On the morning of October 15, 1983, Järvinen followed his usual routine with clockwork precision. He ate breakfast with Emma at 6:30, reading the Houghton Daily Mining Gazette while drinking coffee from his favorite ceramic mug emblazoned with the mining company logo. The weather was typical for mid-October in the Upper Peninsula. Temperatures in the low 40s, overcast skies threatening the season's first significant snowfall. Järvinen dressed in his standard work clothes, insulated coveralls, steel-toed boots, and the distinctive yellow hard hat that had become his signature among the mining crew. His shift began at 8 a.m. with a safety briefing for the day crew. According to witness statements collected by investigators, Järvinen seemed completely normal that morning. He discussed production targets with his usual attention to detail, reviewed safety protocols with characteristic thoroughness, and assigned work crews to their designated tunnel sections. Several miners later recalled that he mentioned conducting a final structural assessment of the lower levels, areas that would need to be permanently sealed when the mine officially closed. The last confirmed sighting of Robert Järvinen occurred at approximately 4:15 p.m. near the entrance to Shaft 7, one of the deepest and most complex sections of the mine. Maintenance worker Dale Matson encountered him carrying his clipboard, heavy-duty flashlight, and a rolled set of tunnel maps. Järvinen told Matson he expected to finish his inspection within 2 hours and would lock up the site before heading home for dinner. Emma Järvinen began to worry when her husband failed to appear for dinner at 6:30. Bob's punctuality was legendary throughout the community. In 25 years of marriage, he had never been late for a meal without calling ahead to explain. When repeated calls to the mine's office telephone went unanswered, Emma made the decision to drive to the site herself, arriving around 7:45 p.m. as darkness settled over the forest. She found his pickup truck parked in its usual spot near the main office building, keys still dangling from the ignition. Empty lunch pail resting on the passenger seat. The mine entrance was properly secured according to standard protocol, but Bob was nowhere to be found. The silence was complete, broken only by the wind moving through the pine trees and the distant sound of water dripping somewhere deep underground. Emma's call to the Keweenaw County Sheriff's Office at 8:12 p.m. officially began the investigation into Robert Järvinen's disappearance, launching what would become one of the most extensive missing person searches in Upper Peninsula history. Within hours of Robert Järvinen's disappearance being reported, Copper Falls Township found itself divided along lines that reflected deeper tensions about the mine's future and the community's identity. The investigation would ultimately present 4 distinct theories about what happened to Big Bob, each supported by different groups within the community, each reflecting different loyalties and fears about the truth. Keweenaw Mining Corporation's official position, articulated by company spokesman David Rocio, at a hastily arranged press conference on October 17, 1983, was straightforward and definitive. Järvinen had suffered an industrial accident while conducting his final safety inspection. The mine contained over 40 miles of tunnels spread across 12 levels, some reaching depths of 800 feet below the surface. Unmapped shafts, unstable rockfall areas, and flooded sections created numerous hazards for even the most experienced miners. Bob Järvinen knew these tunnels better than anyone who ever worked this mine, Rocio stated to assembled reporters from the Houghton Daily Mining Gazette and the Marquette Mining Journal. But even the most experienced professionals can encounter unexpected dangers underground. We believe Bob suffered an accidental fall into one of the deeper, unmapped sections where recovery may not be physically possible. The company's theory gained immediate support from longtime miners who understood the genuine dangers of underground work. Finnish-American miner Aino Väisänen, who had worked alongside Järvinen for 18 years, told investigators that unmapped shafts were a persistent and deadly concern, especially in the older sections of the mine. The early miners from the 1800s didn't always keep good records, Väisänen explained during his formal interview. We'd find old workings that weren't on any official map, some of them hundreds of feet deep. If Bob fell into one of those forgotten shafts, you might never find him, no matter how hard you searched. But environmental activists who had been monitoring the mine's operations saw Järvinen's disappearance through a very different lens. Dr. Patricia Holmberg, a hydrogeologist from Michigan Technological University who had been documenting groundwater contamination around the mine site for over 2 years, believed Järvinen had discovered evidence of systematic illegal toxic waste disposal and had been silenced before he could report his findings to federal authorities. The timing is far too convenient to dismiss as coincidence, Dr. Holmberg told investigators during her interview on October 20th, 1983. Bob disappears just weeks before the mine closure, right when final environmental assessments are being conducted by federal agencies. We've been finding elevated levels of mercury, lead, and other heavy metals in nearby streams for months. Someone with Bob's access and technical knowledge could have documented exactly where those contaminants were coming from and how they were being disposed of. Holmberg's theory gained significant traction among environmental groups who had been pressing for a comprehensive investigation of the mine's waste disposal practices. They pointed to the rushed nature of the closure proceedings and the company's aggressive resistance to independent environmental monitoring. According to documents later obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, Keweenaw Mining Corporation had lobbied extensively with state and federal officials to limit the scope of environmental oversight during the closure process. The third perspective came from Joseph Kingbird, an elder of the Keweenaw Bay Indian community, who addressed a packed tribal council meeting on October 25, 1983. Kingbird's interpretation drew on traditional knowledge of the land and its spiritual significance to his people. "This mining operation has disturbed sacred ground for over a century," Kingbird told the assembled council members, his words carefully recorded in the official tribal minutes. "The copper veins they follow run directly through burial places of our ancestors. The earth has been warning them to stop this desecration, but they wouldn't listen to the signs. Now the earth has claimed one of their own as payment for the damage done." Not? Kingbird described traditional stories passed down through generations about underground spirits who guarded the copper deposits. Spirits who would lead intruders astray in the tunnels if they showed disrespect for the sacred nature of the metals. While his explanation was publicly dismissed by law enforcement and mining officials, it resonated deeply with some community members who had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the environmental destruction associated with decades of copper extraction. The fourth theory, and perhaps the most persistent over the following decades, came directly from Emma Järvinen herself. In detailed interviews with sheriff's investigators, Bob's widow maintained that her husband had been deliberately murdered to prevent him from exposing corruption and safety violations within the mining operation. Bob had been acting completely different for weeks before he disappeared, Emma told Detective Lieutenant Carl Antilla during a lengthy interview on November 3, 1983. He was staying late every night, bringing work papers home, making phone calls he wouldn't discuss with me. He had found something in those tunnels, something someone desperately didn't want him to find or report to the authorities. Emma's suspicions were based on several troubling factors that had emerged in the weeks before Bob's disappearance. She had noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked near their house at odd hours, always with out-of-state license plates. Bob had mentioned receiving increasing pressure from company executives to speed up his final safety reports and skip certain inspection procedures. Most significantly, she had overheard portions of a heated telephone conversation in which Bob had argued with someone about proper procedures and doing things by the book, no matter what. "My husband was the most honest man I ever knew," Emma stated in her formal statement to investigators. "If he discovered safety violations or illegal activities, he would have reported them to the proper authorities, regardless of pressure from the company or threats to his job. Someone in a position of power knew that about Bob, and they couldn't afford to let him finish his work and file his reports." These competing theories reflected fundamental divisions within Copper Falls Township about loyalty, environmental responsibility, and economic survival. Mining families, many of whom had worked for Keweenaw Mining Corporation for multiple generations, generally supported the company's explanation of an unfortunate industrial accident. Environmental advocates saw the disappearance as clear evidence of a corporate cover-up designed to prevent embarrassing revelations about contamination and illegal waste disposal. Native American community members viewed it through the lens of cultural violations and spiritual consequences that had been building for decades. Emma Järvinen and her supporters believed it represented a carefully planned crime designed to protect powerful corporate interests. As the initial investigation progressed through the harsh winter of 1983 to 84, these divisions would deepen rather than resolve, ensuring that Robert Järvinen's disappearance would remain a source of community tension and unanswered questions for decades to come. The search for Robert Järvinen began at first light on October 16, 1983, with the largest underground rescue operation in Keweenaw County history. Sheriff Walter Latty coordinated teams from 3 counties, bringing together mine rescue specialists, volunteer firefighters, and experienced local miners intimately familiar with the tunnel system. What they discovered during those first crucial days would raise far more questions than answers about Big Bob's fate. The initial challenge was simply accessing the mine's lower levels safely. Autumn rains had significantly increased water seepage into the tunnels, and several sections showed clear signs of recent rockfall. Mine Rescue Coordinator James Harju, a veteran of similar operations across Michigan's Upper Peninsula, established base camp at the main entrance and began systematic exploration of the 12 known levels, working methodically from the surface downward. The first thing you learn in mine rescue work is that every tunnel tells a story, Harju explained to investigators during his debriefing. Disturbed rock, fresh footprints in the mud, equipment left behind, changes in airflow. These things leave a clear trail if you know how to read the signs. But in Bob's case, that trail seemed to simply vanish after the 7th level, like he just disappeared into thin air. Searchers found unmistakable evidence of Järvinen's presence in the upper sections of the mine. His clipboard was discovered on level 4, resting on a support timber with detailed inspection notes still attached. The notes, written in Järvinen's characteristically careful handwriting, documented structural assessments of support beams and ventilation shafts with his usual methodical precision. The final entry, timed at exactly 4:47 p.m., recorded satisfactory conditions in Section 4C and noted his intention to proceed to lower levels for final structural assessment. On level 6, search teams found Järvinen's heavy-duty flashlight, still functional but switched off, wedged securely between 2 support posts near the entrance to Shaft 7. This discovery immediately puzzled investigators because established mine safety protocol required foremen to maintain constant illumination while underground. Experienced miners never turned off their primary light source unless facing an absolute emergency that demanded complete darkness. The most significant and troubling discovery came on October 18th, when rescue worker Dale Covisto spotted something metallic gleaming in the depths of the Devil's Throat. A particularly deep and dangerous vertical shaft that dropped from level 7 to unknown depths far below. Using specialized rope and pulley equipment, recovery teams managed to retrieve the object from approximately 200 feet down the treacherous shaft. It was Robert Järvinen's distinctive yellow hard hat. The helmet bore unmistakable impact damage consistent with a significant fall, but forensic examination by the Michigan State Police revealed details that complicated the apparent accident theory. The impact patterns suggested the hat had struck multiple surfaces during its descent, bouncing violently off rock walls and support structures as it fell. More puzzling to investigators, the helmet's chin strap remained completely intact and properly adjusted, indicating it had been securely fastened when it somehow separated from Järvinen's head. When a person falls down a shaft wearing a properly secured hard hat, the helmet typically stays with the body during the fall, explained State Police Forensic Specialist Margaret Vertinen during her official report. For the helmet to separate and travel independently suggests either extreme trauma during the incident, or the possibility that it was thrown or dropped rather than worn by someone during an actual fall. Search efforts immediately focused intensively on the Devil's Throat shaft and the surrounding tunnel network. Using advanced rope systems and specialized underground lighting equipment, rescue teams descended as far as safety protocols would allow. At a depth of 300 feet, they encountered rising groundwater that made further exploration impossible without bringing in professional diving equipment from the state emergency response team. The shaft continued downward beyond their ability to search, disappearing into flooded darkness that might extend for hundreds of additional feet. But even as official search efforts concentrated on the assumption that Järvinen had fallen into the Devil's Throat, other evidence suggested a far more complex situation was developing underground. Multiple witnesses reported seeing unexplained lights moving through the mine during hours when no authorized personnel should have been present. Maintenance worker Rhino Tanner told investigators he had clearly observed flashlight beams moving systematically through level 3 tunnels on the evening of October 17th, 2 full days after Järvinen's disappearance. I was securing equipment topside when I saw lights moving around down there in a grid pattern, Tanner stated in his sworn testimony. I figured it had to be search crews. But when I checked with Sheriff Latty the next morning, he told me all search teams had been pulled out of that section hours earlier due to unstable conditions. Similar unexplained sightings were reported by local residents throughout late October and November 1983. Maria Hendrickson, the same woman who would report unusual machinery, sounds 40 years later, told investigators she had repeatedly observed vehicle headlights near the mine entrance during late evening hours, well after the official search operations had ended for the day. They'd be there for an hour or two, then disappear, she recalled. Always the same pattern. Arrive after dark, stay just long enough to do something, then leave without any lights on. The official search operation concluded on November 15, 1983, after exactly 1 month of intensive effort. Despite deploying sophisticated equipment and experienced personnel, investigators had found no trace of Robert Järvinen's body. The working theory remained that he had suffered an accidental fall into the Devil's Throat shaft, and that his remains lay beyond recovery in the flooded depths far below the mine's mapped levels. However, the 2023 investigation led by Dr. Sarah Makinen revealed that the complete story of the underground search had never been fully disclosed to the public. Modern ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted around the disturbed areas near the mine entrance detected several large metallic anomalies buried in the mine's lower levels. Anomalies that weren't part of the original mining infrastructure and hadn't been detected during the 1983 search efforts. The radar readings suggested substantial metallic objects, possibly including vehicles or large equipment, located approximately 300 feet below ground level in areas that should have contained only natural rock formations. Most troubling of all, soil analysis of recently disturbed earth showed traces of materials consistent with 1980s construction debris, suggesting that someone had been systematically accessing and modifying parts of the mine that were supposedly sealed and abandoned decades ago. In the basement archives of the Keweenaw County Courthouse, boxes of yellowing documents tell a story that differs dramatically from the official narrative surrounding Robert Järvinen's disappearance. Environmental scientist Dr. Sarah Makinen spent weeks in 2023 methodically reviewing these records, many of which had been sealed for decades under corporate confidentiality agreements that were finally expiring. The documentary evidence begins in early 1983, months before Järvinen vanished, with internal memoranda from Keweenaw Mining Corporation revealing mounting pressure from federal environmental regulators. The Environmental Protection Agency had initiated preliminary investigations into groundwater contamination near the mine site, and corporate executives were clearly scrambling to address what one confidential memo described as significant environmental liabilities that could result in substantial federal penalties and cleanup costs. Perhaps most revealing are Järvinen's own handwritten maintenance reports, found among his personal effects that were eventually returned to his widow Emma after the investigation stalled. These detailed logs, dating from July through October 1983, show an increasingly meticulous documentation of safety violations and environmental concerns. Järvinen noted cracked containment walls, improper waste storage procedures, and what he carefully termed suspicious dumping activities occurring in the deeper, less monitored shafts during night shifts when most workers had gone home. In his final entries, written just days before his disappearance, referenced tense meetings with unnamed company representatives and his growing concern about covering up problems that could seriously hurt people and the environment. According to Emma Järvinen's testimony, her husband had become increasingly paranoid during his final weeks, convinced that someone was monitoring his activities and pressuring him to modify his safety reports. Bob started bringing home papers every night, Emma recalled during a 2010 interview with state investigators who had reopened the case. He'd spread them out on our kitchen table after dinner, making photocopies of everything with our little home machine. He said he needed to document what was happening down there, in case something happened to him and the truth needed to come out later. Those carefully copied documents vanished the night of Järvinen's disappearance. Emma discovered their kitchen table completely cleared when she returned home from searching for her husband at the mine site. When she asked investigators about the missing paperwork, she was told that nothing of that nature had been found during their search of the family residence. The corporate response to Järvinen's disappearance was remarkably swift and comprehensive. Within 48 hours of his being reported missing, Keweenaw Mining Corporation filed insurance claims totaling over $2 million. These claims, according to court records obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, covered not only Järvinen's substantial life insurance policy, but also extensive property damage listed as mine collapse and emergency environmental remediation. Corporate lawyers moved with equal speed to seal environmental impact reports that had been prepared for EPA review. These documents, according to federal records, contain detailed assessments of groundwater contamination and soil toxicity levels around the mine site. The reports would remain classified under corporate trade secret protections for nearly 3 decades, only becoming available to researchers in 2012 when the legal protections finally expired. When Dr. Makinen finally gained access to these long-sealed environmental reports, she discovered evidence of extensive contamination dating back to the 1960s. Copper sulfate levels in nearby streams were documented at nearly 50 times acceptable federal limits. More troubling were repeated references to unspecified industrial waste materials stored in abandoned mine shafts, with notations indicating that proper disposal would require significant financial resources and an extensive regulatory oversight. Federal involvement in the case created additional layers of complexity and confusion. The EPA's investigation into environmental violations was abruptly suspended pending resolution of the missing person case. The FBI was brought in due to potential interstate commerce implications, but their investigation file remains heavily redacted even today. What emerges from available federal documents is that multiple agencies were actively investigating Keweenaw Mining Corporation in the months surrounding Järvinen's disappearance. But their efforts became entangled in jurisdictional disputes and corporate legal challenges. Perhaps most revealing are the financial records uncovered by investigative journalists in 2015. Corporate tax filings show that Keweenaw Mining Corporation claimed massive operational losses in 1983. Losses that coincided directly with the mine closure and Järvinen's disappearance. These claimed losses allowed the corporation to avoid federal taxes for the following 7 years, while simultaneously transferring ownership of the valuable mining property to a subsidiary company for a fraction of its assessed value. The subsidiary company, traced through layers of corporate filings, was ultimately controlled by the same executives who had managed the original mining operation. This complex financial maneuvering allowed them to maintain effective control of the site, while avoiding ongoing environmental liability for contamination and cleanup costs. When contacted by researchers and journalists over the years, representatives of the current property owners have consistently declined to comment on the Järvinen case or allow independent access to the mine site. Workers' compensation records add yet another troubling dimension to the documentary evidence. In the 6 months following Järvinen's disappearance, 17 former Keweenaw mining employees filed medical claims for respiratory ailments and other health issues allegedly related to workplace chemical exposure. These claims describe symptoms consistent with heavy metal poisoning and exposure to industrial solvents that weren't supposed to be present in a copper mining operation. All 17 claims were quietly settled out of court within a year, with confidentiality agreements that legally prevented the affected workers from discussing their cases publicly or cooperating with environmental investigations. Several of the claimants have since died from cancer and other illnesses potentially linked to their workplace exposure, taking their knowledge of conditions at the mine to their graves. Today, 4 decades after Robert Järvinen's disappearance, the documentary evidence paints a compelling picture of corporate environmental crimes, systematic cover-ups, and potential witness elimination. But the key documents that might definitively prove these theories, Järvinen's copied safety reports, complete federal investigation files, and internal corporate communications from the critical period, remain either missing or sealed under legal protections. The people who might have provided crucial testimony are now either deceased or bound by legal agreements that prevent them from speaking openly about what they witnessed. The paper trail leads to the edges of a conspiracy, but stopped short of providing the definitive proof that would finally answer the question of what happened to Robert Järvinen on that October night in 1983. Emma Järvinen sits in her modest apartment in Hancock, Michigan, surrounded by photographs spanning 4 decades of a marriage that ended without explanation. At 81 years old, her memories of those final weeks with her husband remain sharp and detailed, preserved by the intensity of loss and the frustration of unanswered questions. "People ask me why I never remarried after all these years," she says, carefully adjusting a faded photograph of Robert in his distinctive yellow hard hat. "How do you move forward with your life when you don't know if the person you loved is dead or simply gone somewhere?" During her extensive 2023 interview, Emma revealed details about her husband's final weeks that she had never shared with investigators. Details that paint a picture of a man increasingly frightened by what he was discovering in the mine's depths. Bob wasn't the same person in those last few weeks, she recalls with painful clarity. He'd come home from his shift and go straight to the kitchen table with stacks of papers. He'd work until well past midnight, writing everything down in his careful handwriting, making copies of documents with our little home machine. When I asked what he was doing, he'd say he was building insurances, that if anything happened to him, people would know the truth about what was going on down there. And the truth, according to Emma's recollections, was that her husband had discovered systematic illegal dumping in the mine's abandoned sections. He told me the company was using the old, sealed shafts as a disposal site for industrial chemicals, she explains. Not just mining waste, but barrels of toxic materials that had no business being there. He said the groundwater contamination was far worse than anyone realized, and they were actively covering it up to avoid federal penalties and cleanup costs. Emma describes her husband's growing paranoia during those final weeks. He said company executives had called him into meetings where they made it clear his job and his pension depended on his discretion about what he found during his inspections. They told him that environmental regulations were killing the mining industry and that loyal employees needed to understand the bigger picture. Former miner Carl Foreman, now 74 and living in Calumet, worked alongside Järvinen for over a decade before the mine closure. Speaking from his kitchen table, surrounded by mining memorabilia and old photographs, Foreman describes the increasingly tense atmosphere at the mine during 1983. Management started bringing in outsiders, guys none of us had ever seen before, he remembers. They wore suits instead of work clothes, and they had private meetings with Big Bob that the rest of us weren't invited to attend. After those meetings, Bob would look worried, really worried, like he was carrying some kind of heavy burden. Foreman recalls the company's response to Järvinen's disappearance as unusually swift and well-organized. They had work crews sealing off sections of the mine within a week of Bob going missing, he explains. Said it was for safety reasons, to prevent accidents during the search, but we all knew those tunnels had been stable for 50 years. Suddenly, they're too dangerous for experienced search teams. They brought in outside contractors, crews from downstate that nobody recognized, and had them working around the clock. By the time federal search teams wanted to access the lower levels, company officials said it was too late, that structural damage made it too risky. Joseph Kingbird, an elder of the Keweenaw Bay Indian community, speaks with measured words about the spiritual and cultural significance of the mine site. That land was sacred to our people long before white settlers came seeking copper, he explains during an interview at the Tribal Cultural Center, surrounded by traditional artifacts and historical photographs. Our ancestors are buried in those hills, and their spirits have never been at peace with the mining operations. Kingbird's perspective draws on traditional knowledge passed down through generations of tribal elders. My grandfather worked in the early copper mines and spoke of dark places underground where workers would disappear without explanation. He continues, not mining accidents, but something else. The mountain spirits would take people who showed disrespect for the sacred nature of the copper, who took too much without giving anything back to the earth. Regarding Järvinen's disappearance specifically, Kingbird offers a spiritual interpretation that resonates with some community members. He was trying to protect the land from further poisoning, to stop the contamination that was spreading through our water sources. The spirits might have hidden him away to protect him from those who wanted to silence him. Or they might have claimed him as payment for the decades of damage that had already been done. Dr. Sarah Makinen's environmental research has provided scientific confirmation for many of the contamination concerns that allegedly troubled Järvinen in his final weeks. The groundwater contamination we've documented extends for miles beyond the mine site, she explains from her laboratory at Michigan Technological University, surrounded by water testing equipment and soil sample containers. We found copper sulfates, mercury compounds, and several industrial chemicals that weren't used in traditional copper mining operations. Someone was definitely using those mine shafts as an unauthorized disposal site for toxic materials. Makinen's comprehensive testing of local wells and water sources shows contamination patterns consistent with decades of systematic illegal dumping. The contamination levels we're documenting don't develop overnight, she notes. This represents ongoing, systematic disposal that probably started in the 1970s and continued well past the official mine closure. The environmental damage is extensive and will require major remediation efforts. Perhaps most compelling is the testimony of Margaret Aho, who worked as an administrative secretary at Keweenaw Mining Corporation from 1980 until the company's local office closed in 1984. Now retired and living quietly in Houghton, Aho describes an atmosphere of secrecy and intimidation that had intensified dramatically during the company's final months of operation. We had corporate executives flying in from Detroit and Chicago constantly during 1983, she remembers. They'd arrive unannounced, have closed-door meetings that lasted for hours, and we were specifically instructed not to take phone calls or messages for certain people on certain days. The whole office atmosphere became tense and secretive. Aho's recollection of the day after Järvinen's disappearance remains vivid and troubling. 2 men in expensive suits came into the office first thing Monday morning, she recalls. They had official-looking badges and said they were corporate security investigators. They went straight to the filing cabinets and started removing boxes of documents, including all of Bob's maintenance reports and safety inspection files. When I asked what was happening, they told me it was routine corporate procedure, and that I shouldn't discuss what I'd witnessed with anyone. Within 6 months of Järvinen's disappearance, the entire local corporate office was permanently closed, and Aho was transferred to a clerical position with the county government. The thing that still bothers me after all these years, she continues, is how quickly they seem to have all the answers. Bob goes missing on a Friday night, and by Monday morning, they're telling everyone he accidentally fell down a shaft and that his body would never be recovered. How could they know that so definitively without conducting a thorough search? Did they send people down to investigate over the weekend? Or did they already know exactly what had happened to him? 4 decades later, these living witnesses to the events surrounding Robert Järvinen's disappearance continue to grapple with unanswered questions and unresolved suspicions. Their testimonies, gathered across multiple investigations and interviews, paint a remarkably consistent picture of corporate secrecy, environmental crimes, and a community forced to choose between economic survival and moral accountability. The mysterious sounds that first alerted residents to renewed activity at the abandoned Keweenaw copper mine continue to echo through the forests of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Local resident Patricia Niscala managed to record the mechanical noises on her smartphone in September 2023, capturing what clearly sounds like heavy industrial machinery operating somewhere deep underground. It happens maybe twice a month, always during the late evening hours, she explains, playing back the haunting audio. The sounds continue for just a few hours, then stop completely. By morning, there's nothing but silence. When state and federal investigators attempted to explore the source of these unexplained sounds, they encountered obstacles that seemed designed to prevent discovery. The current property owners, a subsidiary corporation with complex ties to the original mining company, have consistently denied access to researchers, law enforcement, and environmental scientists. Court orders seeking entry for environmental testing have been tied up in litigation for over 2 years, with corporate lawyers arguing that the deteriorated mine conditions pose an unreasonable safety risk to outside personnel. Yet someone clearly maintains regular access to the sealed site. Recent drone footage, obtained by environmental activists in late 2023, shows fresh tire tracks and heavy equipment marks around the supposedly secured mine entrances. The patterns appear to be regularly refreshed, suggesting ongoing activity despite official claims that the site has been abandoned for decades. Motion-activated trail cameras placed by Dr. Sarah Makinen's research team have captured nighttime images of vehicles near the mine site, but the license plates are consistently obscured or completely removed. The investigation into Robert Järvinen's disappearance has been officially reopened 3 separate times since 1983, most recently in 2020, following sustained pressure from his surviving family members and environmental advocacy groups. Each investigation has reached the same frustrating conclusion. Insufficient evidence exists to determine definitively what happened to the missing foreman. The case file, according to current Keweenaw County Sheriff Maria Gonzalez, now contains over 2,000 pages of witness statements, corporate documents, forensic reports, and expert analyses, yet still fails to provide a definitive answer to the central question of Järvinen's fate. We have compelling theories supported by circumstantial evidence, Sheriff Gonzalez explains during a 23 interview at her office. We have documented suspicious circumstances, corporate secrecy, environmental crimes, and witness testimony suggesting a cover-up. What we don't have is a body, a definitive crime scene, or physical proof of exactly what happened that October night. Without that, even the most compelling theory remains just that, a theory. That missing physical evidence may still exist somewhere in the sealed tunnels of the Keweenaw copper mine. Ground-penetrating radar studies conducted by Michigan Technological University in 2022 detected several large metallic anomalies buried in the mine's lower levels, objects that weren't part of the original mining infrastructure and weren't detected during the 1983 search efforts. The university's technical report notes significant anomalous readings consistent with vehicles, large equipment, or substantial metallic debris located approximately 300 feet below ground level, in areas that geological surveys indicate should contain only natural rock formations. Attempts to physically investigate these radar anomalies have been systematically blocked by the mine's current owners, who continue to cite safety concerns and potential environmental liability issues. State environmental officials acknowledge they currently lack the legal authority to force access without clear evidence of immediate public danger. Federal agencies have expressed interest in the case, but indicate that jurisdiction remains complicated by the complex corporate ownership history of the property and ongoing litigation over environmental responsibility. The community of Copper Falls Township remains deeply divided over how aggressively to pursue answers about Järvinen's disappearance after 4 decades. Some residents, particularly those whose families depended on mining employment for generations, prefer to let the past remain undisturbed. Digging up old business won't bring Bob back to his family, argues lifetime resident Kenneth Mackey. And it might end up hurting people who are still trying to make an honest living in this community. Others, led by environmental activists and members of Järvinen's surviving family, continue to push for a comprehensive investigation that could finally provide closure. My husband died trying to protect this community from contaminated water and toxic waste disposal, Emma Järvinen stated during a packed town hall meeting in 2023. The least we can do to honor his memory is find out what really happened to him and hold the responsible parties accountable. The environmental contamination that allegedly concerned Järvinen during his final weeks continues to spread throughout the region. Dr. Makinen's latest comprehensive testing shows that toxic substances from the mine site have now reached the Torch Bay watershed, potentially affecting drinking water supplies for over 3,000 residents across multiple townships. Whatever industrial materials they dumped in those underground shafts isn't staying contained, she warns. Every year, our testing shows the contamination plume spreading further through the groundwater system. Eventually, we'll be forced to deal with this environmental crisis, whether we solve the Järvinen case or not. Tribal elder Joseph Kingbird offers a different perspective on the ongoing mystery, one rooted in traditional spiritual beliefs about the land and its relationship to human actions. The spirits of that place remain restless and unsettled, he explains. They won't be quiet until the complete truth comes out and the damage to sacred ground is properly acknowledged. Bob Järvinen might be part of that spiritual unrest now, his spirit calling attention to wounds that need healing. Recent developments have added new dimensions to the 40-year-old mystery. In late 2023, construction crews working on a new cellular phone tower 15 miles from the mine site discovered human remains in what appeared to be a deliberately concealed, shallow grave. Initial forensic analysis suggested the bones were approximately 40 years old and belonged to a male of Järvinen's approximate height and build. However, DNA testing proved inconclusive due to the severely degraded condition of the remains, and no personal effects were recovered that could definitively link the discovery to the missing foreman. The discovery prompted renewed interest from state investigators, but also highlighted the nearly impossible challenges facing any resolution after 4 decades. Even if we found Bob Järvinen's body tomorrow and could prove his identity, notes retired FBI agent Patricia Chen, who worked the federal aspects of the case during the 1980s, we'd still need to establish how he died, who was responsible, and prove it in court. After 40 years, that represents an almost impossible standard of evidence. As another harsh Upper Peninsula winter settles over the forests of Keweenaw County, the sounds from the abandoned copper mine continue to echo through the darkness. Residents report the mechanical noises, investigators document evidence of ongoing unauthorized activity, and the family of Robert Järvinen continues waiting for answers that may never come. The mine guards its secrets in the depths below, while above ground, the community struggles with questions of truth, justice, and the enduring cost of silence. What happened to Robert Järvinen on that October night in 1983? The answer may lie buried in the sealed tunnels of the Keweenaw copper mine, waiting to be discovered by someone brave enough to descend into the darkness. Or it may be lost forever, another mystery claimed by the unforgiving landscape of Michigan's copper country, where the earth keeps its secrets as jealously as the corporations that once extracted its wealth.